Welcome to the 5th Manchester Masons podcast run by the MLC, Manchester Level Club. Today we have a brilliant guest, Worshipful Brother Tony Freemont, APGP for Manchester and Salford for the Royal Arch. Thank you very much for joining us, Tony.
Oh, thanks for the invitation, Dean. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, no, we really appreciate your time, and it's great to get a little bit to know more about you. So we may as well hit off straight away. We always first start to get to know a bit more about our guests. So can you tell us more about yourself, Tony? Like, where did you grow up? What are your professions, or what were your hobbies growing up?
Okay, so I was, my father was a clerk of works. He was involved shortly after the war in the rebuilding of Plymouth. And so I was born in Plymouth, but soon after that I moved to London, and I grew up in London, and I stayed there till I was 26.
This is a photo of young Tony, actually.
It is, yes. Between Plymouth and Manchester, we went to Bath, so this is me in Bath, and that was the last time I think I had hair. So,
That's a nice set of hair there. I think the locks would still suit you now, Tony, wouldn't it? But yeah, so Plymouth, what was it your profession as well? What were you doing or studied in school?
So I was very fortunate. I got a scholarship to something called a direct grant school. And from there I went on to medical school, and I studied at St Thomas's Hospital in London, which is right opposite the House of Parliament. I started when I was 17. You could in those days, you can't now. And I graduated 6 years later when I was 23.
Yeah, because 17 is a really young age to start medical school, right?
Yeah. Nowadays, most students don't start until they're 19. And I think that's probably for the best. You're really quite young when you're 17.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you graduate with 2 masters? Am I correct in saying that?
Okay, so with 2 sets of bachelor's degrees.
Oh,
so all doctors graduate with a bachelor's in medicine and a bachelor's in science, bachelor's in surgery. Sorry, but I also had a bachelor of science degree because I studied for an extra year, and I got a degree in human anatomy as well.
Ooh. Yeah, I'm just thinking about doing that myself, you know.
I'm sure you'd be very, very welcome.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
I bet you make a good doctor.
No,
a good interrogator. So
yeah, a little bit. But because so St Thomas Hospital Medical School, it's quite well known, obviously, in the medical world.
Yeah, it's one of the oldest medical schools. It goes back 2 centuries, and the school is very small. The medical school was very small indeed, so there were only 40 students in each year, and we lived and worked actually in the hospital for most of that time.
And because you ended up working for the NHS, and you're also a professor, so if you can tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, okay. So after I graduated, I worked in Portsmouth for a year, and I then moved to Leicester, where I worked for 3 years. Young doctors move around a lot, or certainly did in those days. Okay. And then I changed tack, and I went to the University of Manchester, where I joined the pathology department, and I became a pathologist in the university. Academic clinicians work half the time for the NHS and half their time for the university. And so I rose up through the ranks in the NHS and became a consultant, and I specialised in diseases of bones and joints. And in the university, I went up through the various levels and became a professor.
That's outstanding. I think after this, I might tell you a little bit about my back and shoulder.
Yeah. It's usually people's backs, or they show me how they click their fingers and ask whether that's dangerous. Well, it is if you're near me, because I'll hit you. So,
I won't do that then. So.
No.
Not at all. So you worked at, it was a Manchester Royal that you were at for the NHS?
Yeah, the Manchester Royal Infirmary. I worked there for 40 years, and I've worked for the university for 40 years as well.
Oh, that's so good. And you're still at the university, right?
I'm still at the university. I retired from the NHS 2 years ago, so I now work half-time for the university. So doing my same university job as I've always done.
That must have freed you up a little bit of time, at least.
It did. For a while, I was head of the Manchester Medical School, which is the biggest medical school in the UK, probably Europe, with 2,500 students. And
Wow.
trying to keep on top of 2,500 students who are intelligent and tricksy, as well as doing your other university work and working for the NHS was a bit tricky. So now I've got a bit more time to myself.
That's great. We've got a picture of you and a couple of your students here, I think.
Yeah. This is me at the medical students pantomime.
All right.
For those of you who haven't guessed, I'm the one on the left as you're looking at it. And,
I thought there was a student, Tony. I thought.
Yeah. I was just that little head poking through. And you have to be prepared to take a bit of stick when you go to the pantomime, because they're very, very clever people, and the pantomime is always brilliant, but sometimes focused and targeted on unsuspecting academics.
Oh, that's brilliant. And you also you've done some activities growing up as well. Your hobbies, if you can tell us more about what you've done growing up.
Yeah, when I was in my early teens, I took up cross-country running, and I ran at various levels, including running twice for England,
Wow.
England B team. So, and of course, it's always in the winter, so people are always dropping out of teams. So I wasn't as great as it sounds.
That's still good. Very good.
And I did rock climbing as well, which I carried on into my medical school years. This is me leading a rock climb called Nexus on a crag in the Llanberis Pass called Dinas Mo, or Dinas Mot.
I know. Did you do a lot of climbing?
Did a lot of climbing, yeah. In those days, medical students had quite a lot of freedom in how they studied. It's not like that anymore. And so we would go away every weekend to North Wales if we could. And if we couldn't, we'd go down to Tunbridge Wells, where there are sandstone rocks where you can practice climbing.
Yeah.
So,
that's brilliant. I do a little bit of climbing myself, but you said that would have been the first 6A to be led. Was that right, in Wales?
You led free on the crag.
Oh, on the crag.
Yeah. I think there were other 6As around, but in fact, looking now at the pitches, there are 2 5B pitches there, and when we were climbing, of course, the highest grade of climb was extremely severe. And so you had no idea how extremely severe it was. And I see that climb's graded E1 now, but there were climbs that we led and thought, oh, that was a bit tough, which are now graded E3. So you can tell that it was a difficult time. You just went onto the rock face and prayed you came off at the other.
Yeah.
Well,
on site it.
Yeah. Coming off a rock face doesn't quite convey what I meant, but luckily enough you were around medical students, so you were all right. Yeah, I'm not too sure you ever met any of the guys I went climbing with.
Probably the guide on my shoulder. We've got a picture of you. I think you've done a swim as well, because I think I've got a note here saying the fastest time you ran a marathon was 2 hours and 31 minutes in 1974.
Yeah, but we used to go out and run marathons. In those days, you weren't actually allowed to run a marathon until you were 21. So, we used to, obviously, but we just never got time for it. So I was quite fit in those days. On Sundays, the running club I belonged to, which was called Evening in Southall, used to go out and run double marathons. So we'd go off and run 50 odd miles, and that was, in those days, that's how you trained. If you wanted to train for a 9.5 mile cross country run, you go out and run 20 miles. Just the way it was. Nowhere near as scientific as it is nowadays.
Train hard, work easy.
Yeah.
Actually,
Sorry,
go on. Sorry, Tony. Go on.
Yeah, you mentioned the swim.
We've got a picture of the swim, I think. There we are. Yeah.
This was organised by Barry Cuttle, who, if you don't know him, you've missed out on a lot. Very, very senior member of the craft in the Northwest, and he organised a sponsored swim up Lake Windermere. Windermere isn't really a lake at all. It's actually a wide bit of a river. So if you swim from the bottom to the top, as it were, you actually are swimming against a current. Yeah. So we were a relay team.
How far is that? What's the distance?
16 miles.
Oof.
Yeah.
Oof. I'd get about 30 yards. I'm not a swimmer whatsoever. Not a swimmer. So that's so impressive. How did you do in it? Was it like a tournament or a competition?
No. We just decided that we'd do it. We did it as a relay. Yeah. But one of the young ladies who came to swim with us insisted on doing backstroke, and all she did was swim in circles. So we were down to 4 of us who did it, and I reckon we did probably equal amounts. So I swam 4 miles.
That's good up current as well.
Yeah.
You're playing it down there, and especially that marathon time at 2:31. I have to give you credit there, because I know you're down playing the B team, but that is some fast times. Just before, actually, Manchester Level Club were doing a fundraiser for the Yorkshire Three Peaks Challenge on the 8th of August. So if you want to get out the old, you might be running far ahead of us, but if you fancy getting the walking boots out, Tony,
all that running that I did on hard surfaces damaged my back, so now my legs don't work very well. So running is out, and even walking is a bit of a trial for me. But
yeah. But for any of you out watching there, please join us on the 8th of August for the Three Peaks Yorkshire Challenge. We're raising funds for 3 great charities, actually. So there's information on Facebook.
I'll certainly donate to you. How about that?
Oh, thank you very much. It's a minimum of £500. No, joking.
Yeah.
Joking.
Oh well.
Yeah, no, I'm messing. But also, as well as that, you do something really interesting, and I've never actually met someone who does this, which you do bell ringing.
Yeah, I do tower bell ringing. Which there's tower bell ringing and handbell ringing. Yeah. And a lot of churches, about 5,000 churches around England, and it is almost exclusively an English hobby, have bells that can be rung. This picture here is me after ringing a peal. My wife is the right hand of the 3 ladies, and I'm the right hand of the 3 blokes. And this took us 2 hours, 45 minutes. So it's a little bit like doing a marathon on your arms. Fortunately, you don't have to move your legs very much, so I can just stand there and pull.
Yeah, that's the swimming training, I'm guessing. Yeah, which was I've never seen one of these contraptions before. What are they, Tony, to educate?
Okay, so what you can see there is a group of ringers inside a frame, and the frame is part of something called a mobile belfry, and it can travel around the country, and then it takes a couple of hours to put it up. The top part, sort of hidden with the tree behind it, is where the bells sit, and so you're actually ringing as if you were ringing in a tower, but everything is just built around that frame, and they're great fun. And this is owned by the Lichfield Diocese, and anybody can hire it. So if you wanted to hire it there, Dee, it'd be there. You could have it, mate, for a few £100.
Oh, discount mates rates. Come on, Tony.
All right. Okay. Discounted rate.
No, we got actually. I know Manchester Masons. I know we're going to be doing and Manchester Level Club. We're going to be doing a 2-day festival next year. So we're camping. There's going to be bands, everything going on, like some activities. So it'll be absolutely fantastic if we can get that down onto the festival.
Yeah, well, if you want to, we can book it. There's only 3 bell ringing associations that use it at the moment. So it'll almost certainly, if we booked it now, we get it for am I allowed to try one?
Of course, that's the purpose of it. Oh, is it? Oh, brilliant. Darren, yeah. Darren, we're in, mate. We're in.
I'll bring some of my mates along to make sure you don't kill yourselves.
Well, yeah, there is that, because I don't weigh much, so I'll go.
Yeah.
I'll go up.
Yeah, these are quite exciting little rings of bells. So yeah. But yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Thank you very much. But also, as well as your career, you worked for NICE for 7 years. If you can explain about what you did for.
Yeah. So NICE is the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and they're the people who say whether a drug can be used in the NHS. I actually worked for them, not on the drug side, as it were, but on the side looking at diagnostic tests, because as a pathologist, of course, that's what I do. I make diagnoses and then pass the information on to the doctors. And we also looked at technologies. So we looked at things like, tests to see if somebody had a heart attack, or machines like pacing machines for people whose hearts aren't working properly. And then we would say whether there was enough evidence to recommend their use in the National Health Service. And that was just, we met so many bright people and worked with lots of companies as well. It was just brilliant.
Yeah, because it's really impressive and it's a massive accomplishment to become a doctor, especially in my eyes, to be honest. And for you to do it at such a young age, 17, then graduate at 23, it's very young. Can I ask what made you become or pursue like a medical profession? What was it that made you go down that route?
Okay, I mean, I've asked myself this a lot, but I think the main reason was that when I was 11, my father had a number of strokes, which left him paralyzed down one side. He couldn't speak, he was incontinent, but inside he was completely with it. I mean, he could beat me at drafts and things without even looking at it. And I thought there's got to be some way in which you can, if you're working as a doctor, and even then I think I was thinking about working as an academic doctor and doing research and saying, I wonder if there's new things that we can invent, new things that we can research so that we can make life better for people.
That's impressive. I think you downplay it a little bit because that's huge. that is, I'm very impressed with all the work that you've done. And your father's name was Walter, but known as Wally, if I'm right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and because for you and your mother's name was
Sarah, but she was always Sadie.
Sadie, so, that was I've got Sarah. Nickname.
Yeah.
But like your father was and your mother as well. Like you're close to her, but your father was a very impressive man, and also a Freemason. And what I found very interesting was he was in World War I. He was involved with World War I and World War II. It'd be lovely if you could share a little bit more about your father and your mother, if you would. Please.
Okay, so you've got a picture there of my father with his two brothers. That was taken during World War I. My father was born in 1899, and when the war started, of course, he was only 15, and he wanted to get into the Royal Flying Corps. Yeah, I know. If you ever go to the battlefields of World War I, you'll see that there are loads of kids there who are 15, 16. Anyway, they wouldn't let him in to the Royal Flying Corps, but the Navy took him. And if you know anything about sort of naval insignia, which I didn't really, until I looked at this picture, you can see on his right arm there's a thing that looks like a propeller, which is what it is, a boat's propeller, which showed that he was a stoker. And he spent the entirety of the First World War on a very, very ancient frigate, going backwards and forwards across the across the Irish Sea, guarding convoys of food and petrol and that sort of things that were coming into Ireland from the States and from Russia and so on.
Yeah, and how long was he in the Navy then? If you know.
He was in the Navy right the way through the war. He stayed on for about a year afterwards, but that was quite common because we think of the war as ending in 1918, but of course the armistice wasn't actually signed until 1919, so everybody was mobilised until that point. So he must have been there for 5 or 6 years. But he was a joiner and a carpenter, and then, as I say, he worked as a clerk of works. But during the Second World War, one of his jobs was he graded plywood, and plywood came from Russia, and it was used for making things that we might not imagine ought to be made out of plywood, like the Mosquito fighter, which was made out of plywood. And so you had to get the plywood just right, because if you've got two huge Merlin engines pulling an aeroplane made of wood, you want it to be decent wood.
That's impressive. I didn't even know that was until we spoke the other day. I didn't even know that someone actually graded the wood and picked the wood. It was really interesting. I started Googling it as well to look into that. But your father as well, he was looking after buildings as well upon his career when he moved on. Was he looking after buildings in London?
Yeah, so after he'd finished working as a clerk of works in Plymouth and then Bath, he then moved to London, and was involved in the building of the Barbican. I don't know if you've ever been down to London and seen the Barbican. It's made up of a number of huge buildings. And one of the jobs he'd had as a younger man was he was one of the team who actually moved the John Lewis store on Oxford Street back 3 feet because it was over the building line. And so he got known for being able to move buildings. And in those days, the way you built skyscrapers, because they didn't have tower cranes, was you started with the top floor, you jacked it up, you built the floor underneath it. And so they needed someone who got those sorts of skills. So he was, as you say, he was an incredible man. But I didn't really know him after I was 11. So yeah.
No, bless him, and you know, rest in peace, Wally. That's amazing, because that building from top, that's a lot of work. That isn't just something you can. Yeah, that is. And you mentioned John Lewis, because your mother and father met when they both worked at John Lewis, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
And then we've got a picture of, you see.
Yeah, she was a bookkeeper. That's not just the name of somebody who takes bets on horses, but this is so that wasn't her. She was responsible for doing the accounts inside a company, and she moved to a small company near where we lived in London when we moved there, and she carried on. But she was a wonderful lady, because, as I say, my father was taken ill when I was 11. He lived until I was 17, and every night we used to have to look after him. We did it in a sort of one-on-one off rota, and she took a part-time job. She kept the whole house together. You can't imagine, what it was like sort of 50 years ago. There wasn't all the sort of support that you get nowadays. So lovely lady, but she died just after the millennium. But she saw the millennium through, which is good.
But because I know you're both from it. Well, one, because I know like 11 is very young as well to be looking after your dad and your mother there as well, because you can tell she's just what we were speaking about, you can tell she's a very caring person, because didn't she look after a volunteer section for a psychiatric ward? Yeah.
So after my father died, she was able to go back to full-time work, and in those days there were huge psychiatric hospitals scattered around the country, and there was one near where we lived in Ealing in West London, a place called St Bernard's Hospital, and she took on the job of coordinating all the volunteers. So there were lots of volunteers who would come out and help. There might have been 1,500 patients, all of them had psychiatric illness. And so they needed a lot of help and support, and more than the staff per se could give. And so she was the person who was responsible for making sure that they all turned up at the right time, went to the right sorts of places. She was responsible for recruiting them as well. And so.
Well, no, thank you for sharing that, because they all the stories you said, they're magnificent people, and thank you very much for sharing.
Nice folk.
Yeah, and just to pull the picture back up of Wally, your dad, and your two uncles, because can you tell us more about Sam and Robert, your uncles, because they were Freemasons as well as your dad as well, I think.
Yeah, all three of them were Freemasons. I didn't know too much about my Uncle Sam, but my Uncle Robert I knew for a little while, and I knew of him as well. Yeah. And he and my father were both members of a lodge that met near Kew Bridge. And in those days, London wasn't quite how it is now. It was still divided up into counties, so there was Kent and Surrey and Middlesex. So I think they would have classified as Surrey Masons rather than the metropolitan area Masons, because they were that bit further out. But yeah, what was did you know what a lodge your father was in? No, I've never found out that. Never found out the name of the lodge. I've got some of his books. In those days, ritual books were tiny. They were about the size of stamps, but it didn't ever put anything in there. And I've got none of his regalia.
Yeah.
So it was,
But that's where you got. So this kind of leads us nicely onto your Masonic career. Can I ask, like, why did you join then? Was it because of the family, your uncles and your father being a Mason, or?
Yeah, in one respect it was, but whilst we were looking after my father, the Masons were just fantastic. They used to buy me my school uniform. They'd send me away on holidays and so on. Yeah. And the stuff I received from them, of course, I didn't quite understand it in those days, what it all meant, because I was 13 or whatever. But when you see that in action and you think back and think, God, I couldn't have done everything I've done, all the sort of sports and things, going to the school I went to, if it not been for the Masons. And so
that's a huge thing as well. Like it's you know, that's a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah.
And you feel you want to give something back. And as a young doctor, you're just traveling around, you're doing loads. I took my last exams as a doctor when I was in my 30s. But once everything's settled down, you suddenly think, oh, well, now's an opportunity perhaps. And I spoke to one or two people. My father-in-law was a Mason. One of the guys I worked with was a Mason, and they proposed and seconded me into Freemasonry in Manchester.
Yeah, because how old were you when you came in to become a Mason?
38. So
38.
I was quite old when I came in, really.
Yeah.
But as I say, just being a doctor, I was travelling around, as I've indicated.
Yeah, of course,
taking
you're busy.
exams and stuff. Yeah.
Busy, very busy. But like you said, you wanted to give back, and for the next few questions and what we're going to find out, and you certainly are giving back.
I hope so.
No, you most definitely are in my eyes. But you're just before we go into it a little bit more, you're a member of the University Lodge. How long have you been involved in that? And can you tell us more about the University Lodges?
Yeah. Okay. So there's the lodge that I belong to is called the University of Manchester Lodge. It's not a particularly old lodge, and was founded so that people who worked in the university, not just academics, but other people, could have a focused lodge to work in. When the university scheme was introduced, which brings in young men from university, particularly students, the University Lodge wasn't very strong. And so the lodge for the Northwest, for East Lancs, was Old Manx, and now they've grown tremendously. They've done huge numbers of ceremonies, and University of Manchester Lodge has done a lot of the second degree ceremonies for them. And we've applied to see if we could become the second of the university lodges. Now we've become a bit stronger. And in particular, we're really, really lucky to have a guy called Mo Asfer, who you've probably come across. But he's the local representative on the National Committee for University Lodges. And he's now joined our lodge and is going to help us as we get stronger to put together a case for perhaps becoming the second university scheme lodge in East Lancs.
Well, that's great. So it sounds like you've got a lot of work going on. For just to explain, because you can have members join at 18 in a university lodge.
Yes. So on the university scheme, they can come in at that age. Yeah. So they at the moment would join Old Manx, and they work their way through. There are some. One of the problems, and it's not really a problem, but it's the best way to use the word about the university scheme, is that of course a lot of people come to university, spend 3 years in university, go somewhere else. So quite often what you're doing is bringing a young man into Freemasonry, knowing that there is a very good chance that he won't continue within your province because he will go and get a job somewhere else. But what you've done is you've brought him in. And and once guys see all the advantages of Freemasonry, then you know that they will then be able to go on and do Freemasonry wherever their jobs take them.
Yeah, it's really good that I like the scheme. But can you explain to me what the difference is then? Like, what would the difference between a university lodge, the schemes? Are they fully fledged Masons, or what is the difference?
There's no real difference. It's just a way of getting access isn't quite the right word, but access to young men who might want to join Freemasonry, and who normally wouldn't until they'd started a career, and they'd be a bit like me. They were running around and trying to get things. So you bring them into a scheme, and they are then fully fledged Masons by the time they leave, because over 3 years you should be able to get them through all the process to become a Master Mason, and maybe into some of the chairs. I mean, I went to an installation at the equivalent in Cheshire, which is the University of Chester Lodge, and it was very interesting to see, though, that and it illustrates the point about you lose guys as well, is that almost a complete new set of officers came in, because all the guys who'd gone through the senior deacon or whatever had just disappeared. They got somewhere else. But you know that guy has been a senior deacon and has now gone on to something else. Now gone on to somewhere else, and is practicing his Freemasonry. So that's just cool.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I know we spoke about obviously the Manchester Level Club, MLC, coming getting more involved with the University Lodge, because it'd be great if we could get them involved in some of the activities that we're doing and keep them engaged.
Yeah. I mean, when I joined the University of Manchester Lodge, it was I won't say I was the youngest, but I wasn't far off. Yeah. But now we've got young men joining, and I'm sure it'd be something that there's a synergy, an obvious synergy between the Manchester Level Club, and although university, of course, is in Salford, we virtually work across the two halls anyway. So it'd be great, because can I just say that I think the Manchester Level Club is something very, very special, and I'd like to see something similar in the Royal Arch, but we might come on to that in a bit.
Oh, that'd be good. But yeah, I know Darren's quiet, but just a big shout out to Darren Fletcher, our current chairman. He does an absolutely fantastic job as well. So, and he keeps us all whipped in shape. But
and he's got the build of a man who could keep you in shape, hasn't he?
Yeah, but I can run. But just coming on to this as well, and a part of your giving back, and you've had an absolutely amazing career in Freemasonry. You're heavily involved at Royal Arch. Can you tell us more about your role and why brethren should join the Royal Arch? And here you are there, your picture.
Yep. So I'm the guy on the right. The guy in the middle is someone who is celebrating 50 years in the Royal Arch, which is an amazing achievement.
Wow.
And the chap on the left is he used to be something called an assistant to the provincial grand principals, and I'm the assistant to the provincial grand principals in Manchester and Salford. Yeah. So the Royal Arch used to be part of the craft. You'd go through the ceremonies of the Royal Arch in the craft, but as you may well know, back in the 18th century, early 18th century, there were two lodges, two central grand lodges, and they couldn't compromise. They just did things differently, and so eventually they were able to merge to form which is why, of course, UGLE is called the United Grand Lodge of England. Yeah. And as a consequence, the Royal Arch split off into a separate order, but it is an order that is recognised by the by the craft. And places like East Lancashire, for instance, the provincial Grand Master, Sir David, is also the most excellent Grand Superintendent, and that's the case for quite a lot of provinces as well. So
does that automatically happen? Sorry to interrupt you. No? Would Sir David become? Oh.
No, it depends on the province.
Oh, okay.
So Sir David automatically became the Grand Superintendent for our province. But if you go to Cheshire, for instance, the Grand Superintendent isn't the provincial Grand Master. Yeah. But it's an important degree in my mind, but obviously I would say that.
Yeah. Well, I know we introduced you. So APGP is Assistant to the Provincial Grand Principal. So what exactly is that role? If you can share with us.
So there are 5 of us across the whole of the province, and we are responsible for ensuring the smooth running of our chapters in the areas that we work in. And I look after 23 chapters across Manchester and Salford. But if they've got a problem or whatever, they'll bring it to me. I'll try and sort it out. And I also act as a sort of liaison between the chapters and the province, where we have the Grand Superintendent, the Deputy Grand Superintendent, and the 2nd and 3rd Provincial Grand Principals, who are all chain bearers. Yeah. So it's an intermediate role, but I'm there to help with the day-to-day running of chapters, and chapters are the Royal Arch equivalent of lodges.
No, that's good, because you do a lot as well, because you're a member of the education team. And I know you do, I've only found this about when I spoke to you as well, you do a few different things here, but if I can start with asking you about the Talking Heads, because you do a play about the Royal Arch, I think, as Talking Heads.
Yeah, that's dead right, Dean. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Talking Heads has three of us, supported by a very senior member of the Royal Arch, who go out to lodges and explain to them about the Royal Arch and why people should want to join the Royal Arch. And the way it works is that we tend to go to a lodge within a district, and then young Masons who aren't members of the Royal Arch will join in with that meeting, so that they can hear, what it's about and how it works and why we do it.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because and also I've got a few others here. The Learning and Development team, which I think you do the explanations for first, second, and third degree.
Yeah, and we're just coming up with explanations for the Royal Arch as well. At the moment.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's not a performance of craft ritual, but it's giving an explanation to people as to why we do things in the way that we do and how they've changed with time.
Oh, it's brilliant. And Crafty Companions, I think I've got here as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I love the name of Crafty Companions as well.
So this is the East Lancs Royal Arch presentation team, and we have our own chapter as well, which is chapter 44, and which is the chapter of friendship. And we go round and we demonstrate aspects of ritual in chapters. If chapters haven't done an exaltation, which is the equivalent of an initiation, then we will do that for them if they want. Once a year, we're allowed to present a very old ceremony called the Passing of the Veils, and everybody's invited to that if they're in the Royal Arch. But we also go out to lodges, and this is where Crafty Companions comes in, because a Royal Arch Mason is known as a companion, and we're going to lodges in the craft, so Crafty Companions. And we do a sort of explanation. And we've got some really great people, Dennis Heskett and John Kavanagh, who've put together all of these little sort of vignettes that we do. And they're fun in it. I get a huge kick out of going out and you get to see all of the province. And with all of these three teams, I get to see areas of the province I wouldn't otherwise see.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant, because I wasn't aware about the sessions or the plays that you do. So how can brethren book onto the sessions, or how can the lodge book you guys in to come do it? How does that work?
So it varies for each one of those. Normally, though, each of those groups will work through a central sort of booking area, and there are different people that you would go to for each of those. Different things. We work outside the province as well as inside it in LRAT, the East Lancs Royal Arch presentation team. So sometimes we're invited by grand superintendents. Could we come and do something for them? So there's always a central booking, nice. But there are three key people in those things. Who you contact, and they will be the people who can book us in for a lodge or a chapter or whatever.
Well, I know we'll have to vote, but we would love to have you down at Cornucopia, because I'd love to be able to see some of these and listen in, because that would be great. Yeah, well, we'd be delighted to come down, and some of the learning and development team stuff has changed a bit as well, and so there's opportunities there. Certainly, and LRAT would love to come. It's sprung to mind. Would you be able to do one of them for the Manchester Level Club if we were to get a lodge, and kind of, or does it need? Yeah. No. We'd love to do that. Yeah, if you wanted to grab a lodge and we'd come down, and we can link with the university lodge as well. That would be It'd be great to do it at university, because it's the old thing, isn't it? Salford has got wonderful car parking. And so long as you can get there, you're all right. Sometimes getting to it isn't so easy, but because of the traffic. But then, so we could do it at the University Lodge. We invite Manchester Level Club along. That'd be amazing. That'd be fantastic. Yeah. It'd be a great evening. Yeah, well, definitely down for that. We'll go with that. I'd really like to see that, actually. So just to go on to back to yourself, really, how did you become an APGP, and what was your journey to get to where you are today? Because you've done a lot in your years as well. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, because of who I am, I'm quite good at ritual. I've got a good memory, which you'd hope a doctor would have.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. Oh, what do I do now? Anyway, so I've always been quite good at ritual. And when I joined my first chapter, which was Edgerton chapter, which meets at Audenshaw, I was just one of the companions. But they have things. The Royal Arch has things called joint convocations, and there we do a presentation of a certain part of the history of the Royal Arch. And each chapter gives one person to do that. So I was chosen by Edgerton to learn a little bit and to do it at a joint convocation. Yeah. Through that, I joined LRAT, and I think because of all of those things, and the fact that I just love the Royal Arch. It's just fantastic. I mean, I enjoy craft Freemasonry, don't get me wrong, but the Royal Arch to me is just wow. And I was really lucky. So my first appointment, you know about the way that the provincial appointment works. So if you go through the chair of the Worshipful Master, 5 years after you come out, you can go and join the provincial team. And the provincial team has got people who have acting roles, so they're responsible for doing things at Provincial Grand Lodge, or when one of the senior members of the craft is out going visiting, then they come along. Well, the same thing happens in the Royal Arch, and I was made a steward, which is one of the highest things you can be first time around. And then I carried on working through LRAT, and there is a district, within each district there is at least one officer who has responsibility for the Royal Arch. They're called district officers for the Royal Arch, well they were in those days, Doros, but the name's changed now, we're called Rados. And so I did that for 3 years at Audenshaw, and then I then took over and did another 3 years at Ashton and Mosley. And I think I did a good job. Certainly the district teams thought I did a good job. And it was through that I was invited to become an assistant provincial grand principal, which is, wow, that is really heavy. So. Yeah,
no, it's and congratulations. And because I've got here as well, you're a member of King Edward VII Lodge, if I've got that right. University Lodge, Provincial Officers Lodge, and the Royal Arch. Well, how many what other side orders are you in, and are you in any more lodges as well as everything you're doing on top of the learning and development?
I've never really had the time because of the learning and development, LRAT.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a lot already.
To join many side orders, but we've mentioned that I'm a bell ringer, and you'll know that there are specialist lodges for motorcyclists and fishermen, and there's actually a lodge for bell ringers.
The Widows. There's a bell ringer. Wow.
It meets in Oxford, so it's called Clavis Lodge. So I'm a member of Clavis Lodge down in Oxford, and I'm a member of loads of different chapters because I just love chapter work, and I just like the whole atmosphere. And I like dining chapters as well as.
Nice. Nicely done. I think I've got this right, but haven't you recently got another promotion as well?
Yes. So in the craft, I will in November be promoted to past provincial junior grand warden, which is something. I'll be honest with you, I kept forgetting to apply. I was just doing so much, and so the APGM sort of contacted me and said, "I think you should apply." So I did. You don't argue with the APGM, do you?
No,
And I was really lucky, and I've got this promotion, which is just fantastic.
Well, congratulations on that. That's a huge achievement. Yeah, no, that's really nice to hear. So, well, it might be this, but if I can ask you, what is your favourite all-time memory of your Freemason career so far? If you can pin it down.
Yeah, I mean, it's
yeah, or top three, whatever you like. Yeah.
You know, you every time you go out, you learn something new. You meet new people, and you get. But I have to say that just for the sheer joy and excitement, the first real thing I can remember getting really excited about was when Paul Rose, who was very ill at the time and died shortly afterwards, phoned me up and asked me to become an APGP. That was just fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think because of all the work that I'd done in the Royal Arch, that same year, I got a letter from Sir David congratulating me on something I didn't know had happened. And then I opened the next envelope and I'd been made a past Grand Officer in Supreme Grand Chapter.
Wow.
And I went down to Supreme Grand Chapter and it is just amazing. The bridge, the central hall there is just an incredible place. You know, the Duke of Kent was there, and there are 2 days. The first day is the United Grand Lodge, and anybody can go. So I went along to that, and then the day after that, I got to shake, the Duke's hand.
Did you?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, right, very nice. Yeah.
Cool, yeah. I haven't watched it since.
Yeah. Oh, that's impressive.
But it's a real spectacle. It's really worth going to either
wow.
of those. Yeah.
Well, no, thank you for sharing. It's always nice to hear about people's brethren's favourite memories of their career so far. But thanks for sharing. But to finish up, what is it? What keeps you engaged in Freemasonry? What is it about Freemasonry that makes you put the effort in, keep there for be involved for so long, and obviously still have as much passion about it from when you first joined, if not more? Yeah,
well, I think the thing that drives me most is the friendship and meeting people. Academics and doctors tend to lead these very sort of lives where most of your friends are academics or doctors. Yeah. And through Freemasonry, I've met some of the most amazing people I've ever come across, and they're not academics and doctors. So that's good. One thing I really like, and it sounds a bit weird, so I do apologise, but we have this phrase, don't we? You know, making a good man better. And the longer that I've been in Freemasonry, I've kept wondering to myself, I wonder what it is that we're making better. You know, I'll be better at learning ritual, and I love ritual, so I love doing that. Yeah. And then it dawned on me that there's something about us as a group of people, and I use the word spiritual, but it's not quite the right word. We learn with one another what our limitations are, who we are, to accept one another. And I think that's what making a good man better means. We just learn about ourselves. We learn about how we fit into the world. We learn to be better people so that we, go out and do things to help folk. But we're also generally, we are a sort of cement in society is how I look at it. You know, we've got standards, we've got morals. And that's what I mean by sort of spiritual background. You get to learn yourself, you get to learn where you are, and I think that is so important for Freemasons. And I just love that. And every time I go out, I learn something new. That's very nicely put. And I'd like to see how much, because it's the first time I've heard someone say spiritual and explain it that way. And it's really encouraging for me to hear that as well. So I'm cool. And how you speak about it. I know we spoke on the phone as well, just to hear the passion and how you speak about Freemasonry, Royal Arch, the craft. It's really encouraging to hear. So thank you very much. Well, I think everybody gets to the point where they ask you a question. Why am I doing this? Yeah. And then you've got to look into yourself, haven't you? And that's where the answer is. Yeah. No, so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. But before we wrap up, Tony, is there anything you would like to add? Is there anything you'd like to share with the brethren? Anything you'd like to promote for Royal Arch? Or? Well, can I just say that I think the Royal Arch has always been described as the completion of Masonry. Yeah. And when I became a Master Mason, I think I was just a little bit disappointed. I can't give too much away. I think. Yeah. You've still got to get that over that bar. I know. I just missed it because of COVID. I was like, no. damn the virus.
Yeah.
But if you stood back and looked at the ceremony that takes you through to a Master Mason, you think to yourself, is that it? You know, some guys died. I can tell you this, I guess, that the secrets of the Master Mason were lost.
Careful.
And you think, oh, okay, but now what? And then suddenly the Royal, and you can see why the Royal Arch used to be in with the craft ceremonies, because suddenly you get the answer. And so if you're into answers, guys, then the Royal Arch is for you. And of course, it's a lot of fun. So,
and just for those brethren watching in who aren't in the Royal Arch, how do they go about joining?
Okay, you will find that there is a Royal Arch representative in every lodge, and you can ask them about it. You have to be a Master Mason, and you have to have been a Master Mason for 4 weeks. But I mean, you know, you're only just beginning to sober up, and then aren't you? having gone through your third. And if there's an issue, I have a group of people who work with me called Royal Arch District Officers, so there'll be somebody in your district, or you can just get in contact with me. And if you go onto the East Lancs website, you'll find how to get in contact with me.
All right, no, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. So just before we start wrap up, is Daz, are you there? Brother Fletcher, chairman?
Yeah, I'm still there. I'm here.
Yeah, here he is. The man
lurking in the shadows.
Yeah.
No, brilliant interview, Dean. Tony, thanks for your time coming on. Been brilliant.
Oh, well, thank you guys. Thank you, Darren, and thank you, Dean. It's been great, and long may the Manchester Level Club continue.
Yeah, so just before we wrap up, thank you very much for coming, Tony. I really appreciate you sharing the story. Me and Daz, you know, we've took a lot away from that, and I've been researching some stuff you've mentioned as well. So thank you very much for sharing. I would recommend anyone to have a look into Royal Arch. We would love to do, when we can, organise the MLC to come over to the University Lodge and watch some of one of the magnificent things that you do, because I've been looking forward to watching some of them plays. But just to wrap it up, Manchester Level Club, it is the 5th podcast from Manchester Masons. Tony, thank you very much for coming on, sir. Thank you for all the Royal Arch. Thank you for everything that you're doing for Freemasonry. You are a fantastic man. So goodbye from everyone, and it's ciao for now.